Good morning, everyone. This is probably the most unusual thing that I've had to do in my career, and not feeling very comfortable, as you can all imagine, because I'm hoping the ones that have joined us today are all very familiar with me. We decided that we needed to actually do something now because we have been very busy over the last 12 months. Unfortunately, not being able to see people has made it very difficult for us to actually be able to pass on the information. So the purpose of today is to update you all on where we are with certain things, what we've been doing and what's going to be happening for the future. I will be doing my normal chat, which many of you know I feel much more comfortable in a room full of people, but I will give you some brief updates. We have Andy King, who, as you know, again, is the Technical Director of Wernix and our Technical Chairman. And Stuart will also be joining us, who is part of the technical team, who have both worked extremely hard this year on behalf of the industry. I want to talk to you starting off with the marketing side of what we've been doing. We all know that we plan this year to have a new website going forward, and that we were planning to do the website, we were planning to do our new livery, but unfortunately COVID, like many things, has caused us a lot of problems and it has delayed the process. We actually have had regular meetings to try and increase the timing on this, but it hasn't worked very well. So we're looking to do that now at the end of the year. We have been doing a lot of PR marketing with editorials, and I think from memory we do something like 1 a month, sometimes 2 a month. So we have used that time very sensibly over the last 12 months. The one thing that we can tell you, and I'm sure if you use it, our social media has grown phenomenally in the last 12 months. I think from memory we're up to 10,000 followers on LinkedIn, and a substantial amount are actually now on Twitter. So fair play. That actually can only be attributed to Kate, who is very proactive on marketing on the social media. So if you want to actually email Kate at mpba.biz, she will be able to do anything that you would like for your particular company. The next big thing that we have been working on has been our learning and development side, and we have had a phenomenal response, particularly last year, which we thought would be very quiet during COVID, but our actual training days have increased quite substantially. And we now have level 1, level 2 and 3 NVQs available through the MPBA. The other good thing that we're pleased to announce is that our initial approval has been granted for the MPBA to be a registered apprenticeship training organisation, and we have put our full application has been submitted. So it is time now for us to wait and see what happens. But we are very confident. We have put a lot of work into it. It will make a difference because the whole purpose of our learning is for the industry. It is bespoke training. It's actually making sure you have what you want out there for your staff, as we are a very specialist type of industry sector. Again, for the Learning and Development Hub, Richard Hipkiss, his contact is richard@mpba.biz. Please get in touch. He will discuss anything that you need to have. The other thing that we've identified actually during COVID was because, I mean, it is easy when you think about it. You have the time where you're in an office, something that you're always firefighting against when you're rushing around. And one of the the things that we've been doing is something called Business Shield. And I'm not really sure how many people actually are aware of Business Shield. So one of the things that we actually did, we looked at the contacts that were actually getting information from Business Shield, and there were not many who actually were still about. So we've now actually updated all of that. And if anyone hasn't seen it, what Business Shield is, it's a free service that you get as part of your membership. You get a free health and safety check update, you get access to health and safety, you have employment law. All of this information is 24 hours, 7 days a week, available to you online. And we will be actually sending out further details just to make sure the key contacts have got the information. However, anyone can have that within your organisation. There is a contact at Business Shield. It is Jacqueline@stallardkane.com, and that is quite a complicated one, but we will send the information out. Another thing that we've looked at during COVID, which is something that has been quite a concern for everyone now, is the insurance aspect, which is affecting us all. Unfortunately, we had a new member join us sometime last year called Vista Insurance. And we spent a lot of time with them, and you will hear a little bit more about this when we do our report on our technical side. Vista Insurance actually are offering, again, members at no cost an insurance health check. The health check is available to identify to members if you have the cover, the sufficient cover, but I think more importantly is to ensure you, if there's any savings to be saved, you can have that. This is a no obligation option. You know, I would suggest that you certainly make an effort to talk to Vista. We've spent a lot of time with them. They actually understand our industry. And I think the key to that is the fact that they do understand our industry, which a lot of people, I'm afraid, do not. A lot of people talk about it, but they certainly do not understand it. Again, more contact is a guy called Ross at vistainsurance.co.uk. And I know Ross is joining us here today, so he will be aware of what we've actually said and what's available to you members. During the live event, what we would like you to do is to please post any questions using the live event Q&A window. If you can post your questions at any time, the event does go out on a 30 to 40 second delay. So if we miss your question, we will aim to pick it up before wrapping up the session. Now, one of the things we don't plan to do is to take up a whole morning trying to talk to you about things that have been going on, because we know you're all very busy. So what I'd like to do now, and these two particular next speakers are very important for all of you. And I think it is something that, you know, if you can take details, if not, we will make it available. So the first one to join us today is Andy King, and he's going to tell us all about energy and what is changing and what we've been doing behind the scenes with government on behalf of the industry. So Andy, I'm going to pass over to you today, and I'll leave it with you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Jackie, and thank you very much for all joining us today. As Jackie said, I'm going to give you an overview first of what the technical team sort of have been doing in terms of the main things in the last 12 months, and then I'm going to talk about energy specifically, and as you all know, my favourite subject, Part L. After I've done my bit, we can answer any questions. Then Stuart's going to come along and talk about fire and other aspects relating to that, and then we'll have some more questions at the end, and then hopefully we'll have a wrap up. So I'll just hopefully now share my screen, which, yep, that looks good. So as I say, I'm going to give us an update on what the technical committee is doing. It's interesting in this last sort of 12 months of COVID. I think that with all the government bodies sort of working from home and probably twiddling their thumbs, I think Stuart and I have never filled out so many consultation documents and replies in the last 12 months ever. I think there's been one that's come out almost every month. And for our industry, we really do have to fill them out and send them back because of the unique nature of what we do. So that's actually been quite a heavy burden of filling all them in, but hopefully they will lead to sort of benefits to us all as an industry. So what I'm going to cover today, there's 6 points. Well, there's 5 points there, and then questions at the end. So as you say, I'll cover the first four, Stuart will cover the fire. So as Jackie's just been saying on that, in her little talk, we've been meeting with Vista, who are insurance brokers, and what Vista have done is they've helped to give us some access to a range of insurance companies, because what we've found lately within the modular industry is that there is a very inconsistency with requirements for insurers when you're providing modular buildings specifically to local authorities, in that some insurers don't want you to use foam insulation, some insurers don't want you to use combustible sort of materials like timber, and some are quite happy with whatever you do, and there's a very inconsistent approach across insurance companies. So what we've been trying to do with the help of Vista is bring that together to try and get an understanding of a common standard across the modular industry, because obviously with the building regs there's a very common standard and it's quite prescriptive about what you need to achieve, but with insurance it's very sort of diverse, and they can literally ask for whatever they want. So a bit like the BOPAS scheme with the sort of modular housing side, where there is a sort of common type approval, we're trying to work with Vista and the likes of Zurich and other insurers in order to create that common standard that insurers will accept, and therefore allow more of a consistency within the delivery of modular buildings. So we've had a number of meetings, that's ongoing, and what we're hoping to do is to get to the point where hopefully in the near future and not the too distant future, we'll be able to come up with some sort of insurance approval system and agreement of a common standard across modular buildings. So second key point just wanted to talk to you about today was some work we've been doing with Consort and Danfast. We contacted both of these with regards to the Part L consultation at the moment, but what happened is also Consort then offered us or advised us of a product that they've been developing around smart heaters and energy control. And we see that there's a huge opportunity by working with Consort and Danfast to set up a system where you're looking at energy control through their smart heaters. Now, I'm no sort of supercomputer boffin, but the heating systems that they put in, they're very much sort of intelligent, AI type driven, and they can help you to save sort of 30 to 40% energy within the use, especially within the higher units where they're in site accommodation, cabins, etc., where you're not utilizing air conditioning, you're still using electric panel type heaters. So what the technical committee is planning on doing is setting up a working party with relevant interested parties along with Consort and Danfast to try and develop that further, to see if we can develop and roll out a sort of an industry solution for smart heating energy control for higher units. So that's something that's going to happen in the near future, and we'll be looking for sort of volunteers to sit on a working group to be involved with that. Next point just wanted to cover was Dfe Temporary Classrooms. This was covered the end of last year. in that in November last year, the DFE issued a document which is the temporary design standard for classrooms and full decant schools. So they issued the temporary accommodation design and specification document, came out in November last year, and hopefully you're all sort of familiar with that. And if you're providing temporary classrooms or temporary decant schools through the DFE, then you will be working to that standard. One of the issues with it is there was a problem with the document, which they've now addressed, and I just want to cover this bit that's been addressed. So within the section on daylighting, the statement relating to the percentage of windows within an external wall was 30% minimum windows. However, it mentioned that it should be against external wall area. Now, what we highlighted to the DFE is that most sort of double classrooms and temporary classrooms, they actually have 3 external walls within their construction, but you only tend to put windows on 2 of those external walls, the opposing 2, so you achieve the natural ventilation. And what they did is that they understood, took on board what we said there, and they issued a clarification that you do need 30% glazing for the external wall area, but only to a maximum of 2 external walls. So that can be seen in this image of a typical sort of single classroom layout where you've got 3 external walls there, and it's not practical to put windows on all 3 walls. You only really want to put them on 2. So they've accepted that 30% glazing only needs to be on 2 of the external walls, which allows you to create those sort of 2 teaching wall areas. The only thing that's probably slightly different is that the figure is now 30%. As a norm, the higher industry have probably put less windows in than 30%. Most companies use a window that's probably about 1 square metre and have put, say, 4 windows in a wall, which is 4 square metres. But you can see from the calculation there that a 7 metre wall by a 2.4 ceiling height, that actually at 30% needs to have 5 square metres of windows. So it is a requirement that rather than putting sort of 5 1 square metre windows, it's probably easier to put slightly larger windows. And you can see from the image there that the slightly larger window there, which is actually 1660 deep, that window then gives just over the 30% in each wall. So that's something to bear in mind. It's a clarification to the document that was issued in November. The document won't be reissued till later on this year, but that is a specific clarification that I just needed to advise you all, and those of you that are providing temporary accommodation for hire for the DFE. So next bit I'm going to talk about is energy update, Part L to be precise, and this is for England. Wales Part L consultation is sort of following, and a Scottish one is sort of again imminent, but this is predominantly, I'm just going to cover England at the minute because it's the one that we've just worked on and submitted a couple of weeks ago. So Part L consultation for England came out in January this year. It was submitted on the 13th of April. We will start to get feedback on there. We've had a number of meetings face-to-face or computer-to-computer with the people and the team that are running Part L for MHCLG. We're still very fortunate that they recognise that rather than just working with ourselves through consultation, that they are happy and required to meet with us face-to-face to get a much more detailed understanding of our requirements. So that will be ongoing now consultations ended, and we'll have another meeting with them in the summer to try and iron things out before the new Part L document is actually laid before Parliament in December, and at the moment it's planned to come into force in June next year. So you've got sort of 15 months before it comes in, and in the next 6 months there will be a lot of toing and froing, and then by December this year, we'll see the actual document and exactly what is required. So there is a current document that's downloadable at the moment, which I can't see it changing too much from what the end document is, but there may be a few tweaks. We've certainly asked for a few tweaks, and we'll see where it goes. But what I'm going to present to you today is our understanding of the current document and how it impacts our industry. So just to give you a bit of history, I mean, this change that's coming along in 2022, it's going to be the first major change in Part L since 2002. So those of you that can remember back in 2002, everything changed, and it went from elemental compliance of U values to the introduction of S-Bem and carbon emissions. We then had minor changes, although for most of us they didn't feel like minor changes in 2006, 2010, 2014. But this sort of 2021, as it's called, this change is the first major change, and I'll explain why it's a significantly major change. It's linked to a publication that was made last year called Future Building Standards document, and that document is going to start coming in from 2025, and the aim of that document is to sort of get the UK ready for 2050's sort of net zero, or whatever year net zero comes in, because each successive government tries to move it sort of forward or backwards. But what it really means is certainly this year there's going to be a major change to Part L and energy within buildings. 2025 there's going to be another major change, and then it's really going to start ramping up towards zero energy sort of in the middle of the century. So in terms of the key points to this change, we've probably all been familiar with ADL 2A, which is the book that covers new build, and then L2B, which is the book that covers extensions refurbishment. That's all going to go. There's going to be one book. It will be Part L2, which is the non-domestic part of the energy requirements, but it will, new build, extensions, refurbishment will be rolled into a single book. That new book will deliver a 27% reduction in carbon emissions from the current regulations, so that's quite a chunk, but also there are a lot of other things coming along, in that there is an improvement in base fabric U values. Now, for our modular industry, for us being manufacturers who build buildings to go on to hire fleets for multiple years, that's a significant change, because it basically means everything you build from next year, you're going to have to change the U value and probably come up with new designs, new thermal calculations, probably need new fire testing. So this is why it's a major change. It is almost forcing you to sort of upgrade, redesign your buildings, etc. And that's what we're talking to government about, that we don't want to make this change this year and then in 3 years find we have to do it again. As a manufacturer, we're looking to redesign product and then keep that product for a number of years through its sort of practical manufacturing life. The other major key point in this document, we've been used to S-Bem calculations, which give us a carbon emission to do the pass or fail, the BER versus the TER, but they've added a second calculation in on prime energy, which is actually the energy required to run the building. So as well as the emissions coming out of the building, you need to also calculate the energy that the building uses. So there's two calculations there, and that obviously makes it a little bit more complex, but it goes to help to move towards this sort of net zero carbon world that we eventually are all going to live in. So for our industry and covering the types of building that we provide within our industry, there's still 3 categories. So the top category is temporary buildings with a service life of less than 2 years, which are then demolished and disposed of after those 2 years. So they're not applicable. They're the buildings that are exempt from Part L. They don't apply in our industry. Our industry is the bottom 2, which, if you look at cabins, modular buildings, they have a planned service life of greater than 2 years, but they may be used on multiple sites for less than 2 years. So that is what we've sat in for the last sort of 18 years of category. We'll still sit there. And then you've obviously got the new build permanent, or the second-hand sale, or the long-term over 2-year hire. So we sit in those bottom 2 categories, and they haven't changed. So we're still in the same 2 categories we were, and that means Part L applies to all the buildings that we provide that are greater than 50 square metres. So although building regs kicks in at 30 square metres, Part L only kicks in at 50 square metres. So what's happening with the new regulations? So if we're looking at a building, obviously over 50 square metres, if that building is going to be on site for more than 2 years, so if it's a sale or it's an over 2-year hire and it's newly built, there are no relaxations in the regulations. And that's the same as it is now. There's no dispensation. If you're building new and it's going on site for more than 2 years, you've got to fully comply with these regulations. So new U values, new calculation method, etc., etc. If you're relocating a building or you're providing a long-term hire, but you're using fleet stock or a second-hand building that was made before these regulations come in, then we still get the relaxation of the BER-TER in the it was built in good faith scenario that we've had for the last sort of 18 years. And those relaxation factors mean that when you do your S-Bem calculation, you get a sort of a correction factor to bring the target down by a figure to allow the as-built building from a while to still comply. So those 2 haven't changed in terms of their principle. The figures that we are allowed to relax by have altered slightly, but from the initial work that the MPBA and Richard has done on running calculations, they aren't any different than what we've had for the last sort of 18 years. And we see the figures there ranging that if it's a new build, it's 1.0, which effectively means it needs to meet the regulations. If it was built before 2022, you get a 1.3 correction factor, which means that you get a 30% relaxation, which is why with a 27% improvement, they sort of net back to roughly where they were before. So they still apply to buildings that are going on site more than 2 years that were built before these regulations come into force. If the modular building is going on site for less than 2 years, which is typically what the higher fleet buildings are, less than 2 years, we are still allowed to use generic calculations. So if you're providing a double classroom to a site for only a year, you're allowed to use a generic calculation. You haven't got to do a dedicated S-Bem if it's on site for less than 2 years. However, in terms of building control policing this, the building that you put on site must be of the same fabric standard as the generic calculation, and it must be broadly the same size. So if the generic calculation says it's 155 square metre double classroom and you're putting a 200 square metre double classroom on, then that's close enough. But it needs to have the same fabric standard in the calc as what you're providing. The slight change here is where we had the MPBA's portal, where you had to log calculations and that through it. That is no longer required. You're allowed to have company-specific generic calculations. So the MPBA will be setting up a set of generic calculations for free issue to members. However, if you choose not to use these and create your own company calculations, then you can do that. But they need to be managed by a competent person, and that competent person would then need to be audited, etc., to ensure that these calculations are correct and suitable, or the alternative is you would use the industry generic ones. So the process is similar there. The methodology is actually simpler, and it allows you to manage them within your own business a bit easier. And also you'll note there for hires of less than 2 years, the sort of adjustment factor in the early buildings of pre-2006. In the sale buildings, that was still at 1.67. It's been relaxed down to 2.03. So there is again an even slightly more relaxation for less than 2 year hire buildings that are probably sort of more than 15 years old or so. So if we move on then to new build buildings, the new build fabric U values have been improved. As I said, it's the first time since 2002. So the old figures of the 0.25s and the 0.35s we've all been used to, they are going. However, because Part L2A and Part L2B have now been combined, and as before, if you are refurbishing a building and you are replacing the wall panel, adding new wall panels, or replacing the insulation, say within a wall panel, a floor or a roof, you need to replace that wall panel or that thermal element with a figure to meet the new value. So if you've got a wall at 0.35 that you need to take out and put back in, you can't put it back in at 0.35, you need to put it back in at the new figure. So that's one of the things to be mindful of when you're refurbishing existing modules. You need to refurbish them to the new figure, but if you're just reusing them, you can reuse them at the existing figure. So the new U values we see there, we used to have floors and roofs at 0.25. They've now gone down to 0.18. Fortunately, if you, depending on how you construct your sort of modules, there are plenty of industry roofing materials that will go from now down to 0.18. So there's lots of product on the market to achieve those figures. Walls have gone from 0.35 to 0.26. So they've come down quite a chunk there. So that is the design figures that of U value that you need to be building your new build to from next year. And if you're refurbishing an existing module and replacing or refurbishing the thermal elements, again, those are the figures that you need to use. But this covers new build, it covers extensions, and it covers refurbishment. Unlike at the moment where L2B is better than L2A, these are the same figures across the whole board. So there's only one set of figures that you need to construct to. Air testing. Air testing figures, they've gone, the worst case maximum has gone down from 10 to 8. However, if you're building a modular building and it's up at 10, you've really got a problem with your construction. We should be looking at sort of between 3 and 5 for modular buildings. So although the figure has come down, it shouldn't really impact the industry. The bottom point there, where higher buildings of less than 2 years, they can still use type approval that we've used for a while. However, what they've put in at the moment is that they've put in a cap at 500 square meters. Now, we believe that is way too low. So we've asked them if they can remove the cap, and just because on the generic calculation, there is no cap on size. Therefore, we've asked them to follow the same concept and have no cap on air testing size. If the building is on site for less than 2 years, we're looking to use type approval across that building as long as it uses standard components. So that's something that's up in the air. But at the moment, the regulation states that if you're putting a building on site for less than 2 years and it's less than 500 square meters, you can use type approval. If it's over 500 square meters, then you would need to air test it. So that's something that we're trying to overturn, and we'll keep you posted on that. So that sort of covers the key points, mainly around the fabric. Obviously, I'm not going to go into the M&E side of this because that's really for yourselves to decide what M&E solutions you use, whether you use wet heating, air conditioning, heat pumps. The thing that I can advise is that the notional building, which is used within S-Bem, will now be electrically heated, where in the past the notional building has been gas heated, and therefore you've done a sort of correction to the electric that we tend to use. Fortunately for us as an industry, because the UK's energy grid is being decarbonised, therefore electric is now formed as the notional heating. So it is expected that most new build, and certainly nearly every new modular build, will have some sort of heat pump, air conditioning, what other electric fed system. So that helps us immensely. And also point of use electric water heaters are now back in favour. Again, as an industry, we've used those for years, but the notional building used to have central hot water. They've now gone to point of use electric. So unfortunately for us as an industry, it's quite nice to sit there and think all the things that we've done for a number of years are now becoming in vogue, and they're the things that we've done, and they're now actually sort of following almost the technology that we've used. So that's the sort of summary of Part L at the moment. I notice that you can see me now back on the screen again. So if you've got any questions on Part L, I'm happy to answer them now, or we can save them all to the end if they've not come in yet. And Stuart will do his update on fire and other things relating to fire, and then we'll have a general Q&A at the end. So thank you very much for listening. And Richard, any burning questions, or shall we wait to the end?
We do have a few questions, Andy.
Okay.
So first question relevant to energy is, will there be any other changes to the S-Bem software to take into account the specifics of modular buildings?
The S-Bem software is out as a consultation version at the moment. That is being changed to reflect the changes within the notional buildings. What we've also asked them, and we've found by dummy calculations that we've run, we found that there are challenges with the heating of small spaces, i.e. toilets, small halls, corridors, whereas in the modular industry, we tend to use electric panel heaters in the, say, a toilet area, and then we'll use air conditioning in an office or a classroom. At the moment, S-Bem sort of doesn't, it prefers you to use air conditioning in the toilet area as well, because it believes you're on a central sort of AC system. So we've spoke to government and asked them to recognise the use of electric panel heaters within these small spaces. And we've asked them to change S-Bem to allow the new technology of electric panel heaters. So the work we were doing with Consort was to look at hybrid heaters, which are part convector and part radiant panel, and therefore they use less energy. We've also been looking at these smart controls. Well, at the moment, those hybrid heaters and smart controls aren't recognised within S-Bem, but we've asked the BRE, who obviously control S-Bem for the government, to allow these efficiency factors to be built in to the heating of small spaces. So they're looking at that. It's quite positive dialogue. And if we can get that to be successfully implemented, we'll have huge benefits to the modular industry in that how we tend to heat these small spaces. So hopefully the answer is yes, it will, and it will be something that's quite positive for us as an industry.
Thanks, Andy. That was a good answer. Just to add on to that, onto S-Bem, you mentioned earlier that they will be adding in the S-Bem an electric notional building. Just a word of caution to anybody that does download the current consultation building version, that electrical notion or building is not in the current consultation version. It will be added at a later date. There's a note from Jim Cowell at Ediot, Andy, if you could comment. It says, note to all, take care if your client is asking for compliance with the Dfe temporary spec, as they require compliance with the approved document L2A, assuming a period greater than 2 years, even if the contract is less than 2 years.
Yes, I think what the Dfe temporary spec, one of the big concerns there is it's still assumed that although it's temporary, they're looking for as much permanent compliance as possible. And it's one of them where if you're providing a building to that temporary specification, it's always good practice to get in early, meet with the client. Usually there's a main contractor on board building the main school, and start negotiating practical derogations, because at the end of the day, the DFE can't afford a full spec. So practical derogations are something that you should discuss quite quickly within or early within the project.
One last question, Andy. Will the MPBA be offering any training on the update to Partel or the calculation software?
Yes, hopefully quite a lot. I mean, the intention is, like we've done in the past, that we will have a seminar or a workshop day in order to present the changes as they are. Through the Learning and Development Hub, there will also be Partel training, which can be done in company if required, or remotely. And I mentioned about competent persons to do your own generics and run your own S-Bem. In the MPBA will be able to assist and work with you in relation to competent person training for S-Bem compliance and creating your own generic calculations.
Well, thank you, Andy. That was an amazing amount of detail. I think it actually makes people understand now, when I said earlier on that we have been very busy. There is a lot of content for people that are listening. We will make sure it is all available. And, you know, please, if you are uncertain, you know my number, but we will keep you fully informed. And I think, as this is not a live event, possibly when we go to September, we will then have some more information or repeat some of this information, because it is a lot to take on board. I'm now going to hand over to Stuart Norris from Portakabin, who will now update us on the fire, which again is quite intense. So I'll leave it to Stuart, and again, I'm sure you'll ask questions online if you have any information that you would like.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, thank you, Jackie, and thank you, Andy, for a great presentation there on the Part L. What I'd like to take you through this morning is an overview of the activity that has been happening, everything related to fire. As Jackie alluded to there is very much still going on, and what I'd like to do this morning is take you through some of those key consultations, key activities that are happening. There's still a long way to run in this topic area, but we are seeing some areas that will start to potentially have an impact to us going into the future. I'll just share my my screen, and I'll just go to the presenter view. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about kind of three key areas here today. And one starts really with the update on the recent fire consultations and regulation changes that we know about at the moment. There is a lot of activity going on, as we've said already, and what I'll just do with this presentation today is just kind of give you the high level overview in some of the areas. I can't really go into too much technical detail, you know, in the time we've got this morning, but you know, and I appreciate that everybody on the call, you know, won't have an in-depth knowledge of these areas, but we just got to give you the highlights really of what's happening. We've already heard from Andy with a bit of an update with the activity that we've, you know, in the meetings we've had with Vista, and I'll touch on that again because it is an important area when we're talking about, you know, fire safety in our buildings. There's also a piece to update you on in some discussion and dialogue that we've been having with Warrington Fire, and there's a proposal in place for this industry to perhaps help and lead with a piece of research work which might actually help position modular buildings from a fire safety point of view in the future, and it's something that's of real interest to us at the moment. But we're just taking those baby steps at the moment to explore that and understand, if it's something that we would like to, get more involved with in the future. And then we'll take some Q&A at the end if there are any questions. Hang on a minute, my slide won't change. Okay, we're back on track. So legislation activity. So the focus really is just on UK and Ireland in terms of the activity that's going on here. And everything in this arena really is kind of the knock-on effect post Grenfell. So England approved document B. We saw some changes that came into effect in 2019, which was looking at the use of combustible materials in buildings above 18 metres. And for a lot of the the members on this call, that doesn't particularly affect our markets in a big way. We're obviously delivering medium to low rise buildings generally, but what we have started to see is obviously the threshold of specification and performance of materials starting to cascade down. The government have had further consultations, asking questions in terms of do businesses, individuals, trade associations think that the scope of those regulations should change, and we've not heard anything yet in terms of future direction. But there is an expectation when you talk to people across our sector, other stakeholders, that this 11-metre threshold is potentially going to be dropped down to from 18 metres, but we obviously await to see that in black and white really. We've got similar consultations that have been going on in Ireland, Northern Ireland, and again, following similar themes, and we're also awaiting further feedback in terms of what may happen there. We have seen some small amendments just this year in Scotland. So the technical handbook in April, the April 2021 amendments, it was updated 1st of March, and that's kind of come into effect. And I'll just touch on a very few small points in a minute on some of the things that you might want to look out for there. There's also an advice note that's due to come out from Scotland. Some of you may be aware of this, but the Scottish Government have been really looking at all the building stocks out there, particularly education buildings, and looking at external wall makeups. And a lot of this is really driven from the types of cladding that are on the buildings. So whether it's high pressure laminates, aluminium composite materials, etc. So that's just something to look out for, and you may have some awareness of that. And then Wales, they've just had a consultation that closed middle of this month, and this one's really been more about residential buildings and looking at the owner of the building and their responsibilities, during the life of that building, and who manages it, who maintains it. And again, that's linked into residential, and off the back of what we've seen on high-rise residential buildings. So in terms of building standards, the technical handbook changes, which have just come into effect from the 1st of March this year. The main changes in there really around fire suppression systems, and it's in flats, maisonettes, social housing, dwellings, multi-occupancy residential buildings. And importantly, there are related changes for fire safety in Section 2 for both domestic and the non-domestic handbooks. And if you look in the handbooks, which are available from the Building Standards website in Scotland, you can actually see a full list of all the latest changes. They've actually pulled out all the clauses in a table, just to make it easier to see where the changes are. I just wanted to pull out a couple which might be of interest to people, just on the non-domestic side this morning. So on the next slide, just pulled out a couple of clauses really, and these are in the table that I mentioned just a minute ago. So it's the 2021 addendum, and just a lot of it's linked to the cladding systems, as I've mentioned already. If you've ever needed to do any BS 8414 testing, some references have been removed. They're also looking at going more to the European classifications. rather than the national classification. So we're seeing a real shift here in terms of, you know, the old British standard tests. People are moving to the European classifications more and more. And I think a lot of you will probably have seen that when you've been asked for specification information and documentation to support projects that are going in. There is clearly a transition to do that, and you know, if your products are tested still to the old national classes, you know, it's obviously going to take time for everybody to get products recertified and to the latest standards. There's just bits more information there on cladding issues, and there's a guidance on metal composite materials and cladding. So again, a lot of the focus in this area has been changes around, you know, the combustible elements on the materials and walls. I've put the link there on the bottom of this slide, so you know, if we do share the slide back after this event, you know, you've got that direct link to get into that information and see the more detailed information, and also you'd see the domestic clauses as well that have changed, which are very similar. There's also something else that's happening. So this applies to England, and I think this is part of the reason why we haven't yet seen any further movement on approved document B. The MHCLG team have commissioned BRE to actually do a further evaluation and looking at guidance for modern design and construction methods, as well as all the different building types and uses. And there has been some talk about, you know, whether the different classifications and purpose groups for buildings, you know, are fit for purpose as we move forward. And MHCLG see this being as a key project, which they will then use whatever comes out of it to guide, as well as the consultation that they've already done and not reported on yet. This information will feed into all that, and we will then obviously see a position which they'll probably take out to further and wider consultation again. So, you know, we are expecting further review of the Part P regulations in England. But as yet, there's no time frame established, and obviously through these sessions with MPBA, as we get more information, you know, throughout this year and into next, we'll obviously update you as and when we find more information out. But that's just to really inform you that there is further activity, you know, going on in this area. Okay, in terms of linking back to Vista, and I think, you know, this is a really important area when we're talking about, you know, safety of our products, our buildings that we deliver for our customers, and you know, these are just some examples of issues that we continue to see, and it kind of comes in peaks and troughs, really. You know, certainly in our business, we saw a lot of questions at the start of this year. And then it seems to have died down again. So, you know, it really is dependent on who the client is, what the project is, what the perceived level of risk is. So we've seen obviously lots of questions still continue about high pressure laminates and the aluminium composites, and you know, we regularly see the news reports on the main media channels about, you know, owners in, you know, high-rise residential buildings and, you know, not being able to, you know, sell the properties because it's not been replaced, etc. But we're also seeing that on commercial buildings as well, and people questioning more and more the specifications. And yeah, it's just something to just keep being aware of, really. We also see some of the smaller architects with the PI issue across the market, and this has been really invaluable, I think, with the link into Vista. You know, the meetings we've had with Ross and Vaughan and his colleagues, bringing in other partners from other insurers just to get, you know, some expert views on how the industry is positioned. And it's just trying to understand, you know, we're obviously seeing some bid documents which are actually precluding the use of combustible materials. One example we saw recently was in the London Borough of Camden, and they were saying that, you know, you couldn't use combustible materials in the makeup of the envelope of the building, you know, regardless of building use and regardless of the height of the building. So, you know, that's a different position that we've not seen previously, and it's understanding whether that's going to actually, you know, creep across more areas of the country. We've also seen that the NHS estates, they're obviously really focusing their risk profile, and they're taking that step towards non-combustible materials. And I think, you know, the bottom bullet there in the risk management in bold this is what it's all about. And sometimes you get an inquiry, you speak to the team, you know, delivering the building, you actually talk through your application. You know, there's one thing with the, you know, the insulation, for example, being a combustible component, but when it's built into a system, and it's a system that's tested to perform to 60 or 90 minutes or whatever, you know, fire resistance, you know, we're looking at, you know, sometimes that conversation can actually give the peace of mind to the client team, and you know, you carry on. But other times you get somebody, you know, it's black and white, it's, does your material meet this specification? And if it doesn't, you know, they're not interested. So, you know, we see both strands of that. And all I'm saying really is that, you know, there is a lot of inconsistency in the market. Andy touched on that in the start of his presentation this morning. And, you know, you know, working together with Vista and other partners, you know, it can really only help us as we, you know, try to move forward and demonstrate, you know, the performance of our products in these areas. So that kind of leads me on to just one example I wanted to take out. So this is a good example that we've seen. AIG, one of obviously the big insurance players. This is a document that they've published. I think it's been out a couple of years, but I've pulled out the box which is on the left-hand side there, and it's talking about modular buildings and the risk profile on education sites. And you can see there's some bold statements there, you know, as far as practically possible, the structure should contain non-combustible materials. These must be LPCP approved and fire rated. And then, you know, it talks further about even, you know, the framing and the panels, you know, so I know a lot of members on the call will have product that's got timber framing around the panels. It's kind of a generic way of, you know, delivering some solutions for walling and roofs, etc. And even those have been frowned upon. But the bullet at the bottom kind of concerned me a little bit, because it talks about expanded foam insulation materials, so it's polystyrenes, polyurethane insulations, and it's saying, look, they must not be used even if approved. So, you know, it's that's the challenge we're facing in certain areas, and it's just not consistent, you know. So, you know, some clients, you know, if you demonstrate performance, as I said a minute ago, you know, your project continues, but, you know, sometimes it doesn't. So we have to look at alternatives. Yeah, so that's just important, really. And then to kind of position that with what we might want to do in the future, and, you know, this is just a proposal at this stage. So we've had a couple of meetings with a guy called Mustafa Jafarian, who's a fire engineer in Warrington. And he's looking to partner with the Steel Construction Institute and try and get this project off the ground. I have to say it's a massive undertaking to do this if we choose to. It's something in the region of about £120,000 piece of work, and it's obviously going to take a long time, you know, to kind of to pull off if we choose to do it. Excuse me a minute. So it looks at some key areas really, and the first two bullets there, the structural performance. So this is looking at the capabilities of the structure and the stability of it, and they will be heavily led by the SCI in terms of, you know, their involvement in supporting the report, obviously with the guidance, working alongside Warrington Fire. There's also, you know, looking at alternative concepts, and what that means is, you know, based on the design of the building under a natural fire scenario, or, you know, how would it behave if sprinklers are in there and other firefighting systems, you know, would that change the way the structure of the modular building reacts. They're also keen to have a section on fire stopping and cavity barriers. And that's kind of does what it says in the tin, really, doesn't it, in terms of penetrations going through envelope apertures, etc. Key section really on the elemental performance. So how does that construction behave? One of the things that's perceived in our industry is that a lot of our products generically use PIR or PUR insulation in the walls, and how does that elemental performance work, you know, in terms of that system performance. And I think, you know, everybody on the call will have fire data which backs up, you know, that elemental performance for the wall, and, you know, we've got good demonstration for that. There's one they put in here which we're kind of not a little bit uncomfortable about in terms of the smoke element. So, you know, it's how does that structure reacting in a fire event, and what smoke is given off. Well, smoke's a very difficult one because the nature of buildings and what's inside them, the contents obviously generate a lot of the smoke as well, and there is no legislation or standards out there at the moment to actually test smoke production against or to. So that's not something we'd want to put into this piece of work. And then the last two topics really is all about the maintenance during the lifetime of the construction. So like in the timber frame sector, if that building is altered or reconfigured in its lifetime, and there's obviously significant fire petitions in the compartmentation, how does that get managed through the life of that building? And if there's critical interfaces there, if people go in, a good example is a flat, isn't it? If somebody goes into a flat, reconfigures it, and they're putting sockets into a fire rated wall, do they always actually know about that? And it's all due to the ongoing life of the building and how that's managed really. So that's something they'd like to consider. And then the last one is what happens after a fire event in one of our buildings, and with it being a modular volumetric solution, if it's a severe fire, obviously you get down to the demolition phase, even in traditional structures. But what level of fire in our buildings, would need significant cause and for rework, or what would be the impact on insurance, etc. So there's lots to consider on that. I think what we have said in the groups that have met on the calls and discussed this. Sorry, there is one other slide on here. The scope of it really, they want to kind of limit initially to up to 11 stories, and they've pulled out these different types of constructions, the different purpose groups. It's a massive piece of work to undertake. We've got to make sure that it gives this sector what it needs. And my personal view at this point in time is that it's perhaps too big a thing to undertake at this moment in time. Perhaps we could look at breaking it down into smaller, bite-sized chunks and tackling some of the real key areas. But I think having spoken to Andy and Jackie on this when we last met, I think we want to just kind of take this to the council of MPBA and just have that discussion at that level really, because we're seeing fire safety is obviously a massive area for evolution really at the moment with the regulations and the changes and some of the questions we've seen and we've talked about already this morning in terms of fire safety and compliance. And I think it's the confidence really that we're all delivering safe structures, safe buildings, and a piece of work like this would actually help us, I think, in that long fight, if we think that's the right thing to do. So yeah, we've not committed to do anything yet. The proposal's there, and it's just how we move that forward really as that piece of work. And with that, I think that was my last slide. So if we do have any questions on any of that, I'll hand over to Richard and maybe he'll pose any that have come in.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you.
I thought you might have sparked a few more questions there, but I've just got the one for you. At what point or extent of connecting modular buildings together to form larger areas do you then need to fit fire alarm call points?
Yeah, I can't answer that question. That's a very detailed technical question, and that's I don't really get involved in alarm systems on buildings, so I'm sorry I can't. I don't know if Andy's had any involvement in them, but certainly it's not something I'm involved in at all. So sorry I can't answer that.
Andy, anything to add? Without the microphone turned off?
Sorry, Richard. Only it would depend on the type of fire alarm system, whether you were doing an L1, an L2, L3, L4, etc. So it would all come out from those regulations as to what you're looking to protect.
Brilliant. Well, thanks, Andy. Thanks, Stuart. I'll just hand you back to Jackie to take us to a close.
Unfortunately, that was quite a technical question that we were posed, and what I would suggest is, like many of these things, we perhaps need a little bit more detail to be able to give you an answer. So if you would like to send that one to me on my email at jackie@mpba.biz, I will certainly find the information for you. I would like to thank both Stuart and Andy for their presentations. It isn't easy. None of us feel really comfortable doing it this way. There is nothing better than actually being face to face and sitting in a room talking to people. But hopefully this has given you an opportunity to just see a little bit more information that you needed to know, and we will keep you posted going forward. One of the things I'd like to do now before we leave is to share some dates with you about things that are going to be happening in the future. We have coming up on the 6th and 7th of May, there is the UK Construction Week online. Again, we would have possibly have been there in person had the circumstances have been different. But you may want to see what's going on, because we are going to be looking at that for next year. On the 10th of June, there should have been our AGM and general meeting. To be determined is a difficult one, because we're not quite sure what the rules are going to be. So I will keep you posted. We will have to have a council meeting for the AGM to actually approve the accounts, but whether we can do a full meeting is dependent. The 1st of July Golf Day, which has been an absolute roaring success. We have been totally amazed and are looking forward to that. It is a complete sellout. So we're hoping the people that are going to be able to join us will enjoy what we plan to do, because I think, like everyone, we're all fed up of actually not being able to be normal at the moment. There is programmed a general meeting for September, on the 2nd of September, which we will hopefully pray go ahead and definitely have a proper meeting. In September at the Offsite Expo, we will have a stand there, and we have got some real interesting things to present there for you. You know, we're doing some announcements and a lot of things we've been working at for the future and the benefits of the association. Education Estates, that's actually going to be in October in Manchester, and we have been invited to be there as a specialist area where we can actually talk to people about our industry sector, what we can do, what we can offer. And I will potentially be looking for people to come on board and join us there, because we're hoping that there'll be a lot of people who want to talk to us, which, following what we've been doing during COVID, I would think there's going to be a lot more people wanting to know more about our industry sector. Modular Matters, again, another one, that is a one-day event this year. It has changed, and that's in October, and I believe that's actually at the indoor, I'm not quite sure, it may be at the National Motorcycle Museum, but that has changed on several occasions, but we'll keep you updated. And our event for the year end this year, which again we do hope goes ahead, because this is all subject to what may or may not happen, is our annual dinner. And I would certainly recommend that we, anybody that's interested, once I announce, you actually get your application in to join us there, because if it's anything like the golf, we certainly are anticipating people will want to join us for that particular day and evening, because it will be an afternoon meeting with an evening event as we normally have. So I'll keep you posted on all of that information. What I would like to say is that for everything that's taken place for the last hour, thank you to all involved, Andy, Stuart, and particularly Richard, who set up this technology, because I haven't got a clue. It always throws me completely. There are different ways we can do it, which is a cost to the association, but if you all know me well enough, you know I hate spending money unless we have to. So I thank everyone involved for doing this today, but more importantly, thank you for joining us. What we do is actually for you as members, and it is only worthwhile if people actually choose to join us when we're doing these things. So from me personally, I am really looking forward to standing in front of you and hopefully making you all laugh about the last 12 months where we can move forward and get on with true living. So I will close and say thank you all once again.